Right, everyone. So, if anybody's not familiar with this is essentially the UK Food Safety Facebook group's monthly webinar. We always do this free of charge. We do a range of different subjects every single month. Some of it's on sort of masterclass subjects, other ones just general sort of food safety discussions, etc. We're always open to ideas. So if anybody's watching this today and thinks, I've got a fantastic thing I'd be able to talk about, then please just reach out to us. We're always looking for people to sort of contribute and get involved. And like we say, it's always free, so you're more than welcome to stay involved and stay up to date and join in every single month if you so wish. First thing, these are the latest news and updates. I haven't done this for a while because not really much has happened, but there was a couple of things that I found quite interesting. So health officials have warned of a norovirus spike in England with a 66% more cases on last year, which was national surveillance data, shows laboratory reports of the virus in England are 66% higher than the average at this time of the year, according to the UK Health Security Agency. Please apologies. I am suffering from a cold, so I'm going to try and say all these big complicated words. Next is imported chicken and salmon show a higher contamination. And this was from a UK study. So this is imported frozen chicken was 6.4 times higher or likely to contain salmonella than domestic chilled chicken. And imported salmon was 5.5 times more likely to be contaminated with E. coli. Factors linked to the presence of individual bacteria are relevant for food safety risk assessments and the design of surveillance programs, according to the study. And then the final one, I don't know if there's many of the authority officers and practitioners in the room this evening that are aware of anything that's happened, because I've not found anything myself. But food safety is at risk, according to one article, as EU laws are set to expire at the end of this year. Essentially, by the 31st of December, there's the sunset clause on existing EU legislation. And the House of Lords were due to set to meet on Monday, the 6th of February, to decide on whether to extend the December sunset period. So just out of curiosity, has anybody heard anything on that of any extension?
From what I've been reading on Facebook, Brendan, there's that much legislation to go through that it's going to take them hours or weeks or months or whatever to get through all of the legislations accepted, especially in food safety. So whether or not they will get an extension or whether it had an extension remains to be seen.
Yeah, we were talking about it, was it last week or the week before when this popped up, Steve? It obviously be a lot easier than having to retrain them. Obviously keep all the current laws as they are for the time being and then slowly change it around if we so see fit. Right, so moving on to the actual PowerPoint itself. It's going to let me do it. Okay. So, sushi and sashimi. So what is sushi and sashimi? Well, sushi refers to cooked rice products, which is wrapped with raw and cooked fish products. Sashimi consists of fish, crustaceans, and mollusks that will be consumed raw. The main concerns with this type of food is the raw element of seafood, which will not undergo a heat treatment. This will mean any pathogens that are present will not be destroyed by the heat and therefore need other controls in place to ensure the food is safe to eat. Now, I presume that most of us have had some form of sushi or sashimi. This could also broaden into the spectrum of things like gravlax, which is a raw cured salmon form of dish, which I know that a lot of fine dining restaurants do, and even places like banqueting venues. So this won't necessarily just be broadened to a single type of establishment. So what are the main risks? Well, food parasites, food bacteria, such as Listeria monocytogenes and Bacillus cereus, are the main concerns involved with sushi and sashimi. Because heat treatment may not take place, any living parasites, or their eggs will likely infect the person before consuming the food, causing illness and complications. Listeria is a psychotropic bacteria which will grow down to 1 degree Celsius or even as below as -1, and is also a low-dose organism. Normally, cooking would destroy this bacteria, but these products are being consumed raw. Other controls are needed to reduce the risk. Bacillus cereus can be present in rice, which produces a heat-resistant spore that cannot be destroyed by normal conventional cooking methods, and the exotoxin is very heat resistant and can survive a cooking of 121 degrees Celsius for 90 minutes. So obviously with anything, especially with this safer food, better business, you've got your main 6 points. So the first one is obviously the experience and training, which is very, very important for sushi and sashimi. You've then got the purchase from reputable suppliers, which is also very important. It's not a case of going to your local supermarket and purchasing a fish in hopes that you can serve it for sushi and sashimi. You've got the storage of ingredients and sushi products, which in itself is very, very important and delicate. And then you've got the preparation of the sushi ingredients. Then you've got your safe serving of sushi products. And finally, your documentation and records. Now, I always remember this whenever I'm dealing with any food business by just essentially abbreviating it in a TPS. So you've got training, purchase, storage, preparation, service, and documentation. So TPS, PSD, ensuring people safe, providing simple direction. So let's move on to the training first. So businesses selling sushi and sashimi products will need someone who has experience in the following. They need to have someone that understands the preparing, handling, and serving of sushi and sashimi products, a knowledge of traditional sushi methods and the correct types of seafood products intended for different dishes. Traditionally trained sushi chefs can undergo 10 years of training before being qualified. And then you want someone that is a good, competent knowledge in food safety. This should be at a minimum of a level 3 food safety standard, and continued progression on gaining additional knowledge, specific hazards involved with sushi and sashimi. An online course is not likely to provide suitable knowledge needed, and therefore competent training should be completed through an accredited provider through face-to-face learning or through Zoom if that's more convenient for the learner. This way, the learner in question can ask more questions and gain the necessary knowledge needed. Some businesses, especially where their experienced individual, who is the person creating the sushi dishes, may not have English as a first language or may not be comfortable in English as a first language. You may be able to have a situation where there is a person that is competent in English that can be trained to that level 3 standard with ongoing training, because that's one thing I want to outline. It's not a case of just having that level 3 certificate. It's essentially having that level 3 knowledge and continued learning, understanding the specific hazards that are involved with sushi and sashimi. Then you could have the secondary person that is the person that is experienced in sushi products and sashimi products. Which leads on to the next, which is your food handlers, which doesn't necessarily mean the person that's trained in sushi. It could be involved in everybody. So all food handlers, this is when we're talking about sushi, should have completed a level 2 food safety course or equivalent. If the English isn't a first language, bespoke training may be more suitable to focus around sushi and sashimi. When I've worked in this sort of area in the past, and it's not necessarily people of their first language, bespoke training is a lot more simpler and a lot easier because you can have somebody translate and at least go through the safety practices so that they understand. They don't necessarily need to sit there and pass a test, just to be able to get that good, competent knowledge so that they understand what is safe and what isn't safe. Junior food handlers should be supervised when preparing, handling, and serving sushi products. At no point should an inexperienced food handler be left to their own devices when preparing and serving these dishes. If you remember on that last slide, it says it can take 10 years for somebody to become qualified as a sushi chef traditionally. So you can imagine that even if somebody's been in a sushi restaurant for a year, they might not be 100% experienced in the full sushi preparation methods. Constant review will need to occur with junior staff members until they have shown a degree of competence that can be satisfied as experienced. So then leads on to point 2, which is purchase from your suppliers. Now, this is obviously very brief. This is what a business must do. So they must inform their fish or seafood supplier what products they will be using for sushi and sashimi. They need to check the supplier that they are competent, reputable, and suitable for the sourcing of fish for raw consumption. The supplier themselves, they must ensure any seafood that they supply to the business is suitable for raw consumption or is categorized as sushi grade. They have to provide documentation on this and have evidence that seafood is sourced for raw consumption has been caught in safe waters. They must also provide for the business the paperwork that proves one of the following freezing targets have been achieved, which is either a minus 20 degrees Celsius as a core temperature for a minimum of 24 hours, or minus 35 degrees Celsius for a minimum of 15 hours. It's important to note the temperatures that have just been stated, they are only to kill the parasites and not the bacteria or viruses. It's always important when working with a business or discussing with a business, if the seafood has not been supplied with that information, it is not likely safe for raw consumption. So, which then leads to storage. So the main storage points are obviously just our normal guidance, which is store frozen food below 18 degrees Celsius. Chilled food should be stored below 3 degrees Celsius. Ideally is close to 1 degree Celsius with listeria as a risk factor. And one of the main points to take from the storage that's specific for this product is not to store the raw fish with other raw unsafe food. So if there's some other unsafe fish that needs to be cooked, they don't store the raw sushi fish with that. They have to consider that the raw fish is a ready-to-eat product at all times, exactly the same you would with, for instance, like creme fraiche or cheeses, etc. Now, curing of rice and seafood is very, very common in sushi. And it's important because Bacillus cereus and Listeria monocytogenes have a pH tolerance of 4.5 and 4.0 respectively. Now, a business may want to alter the pH content to produce of the product, but should take into account the seafood itself will have a water content that will dilute this curing process down. So food products such as apples, oranges, cherries, berries have a pH range of 3.1 to 4.0. Obviously, that's not essentially a guidance of these are the products that you use, but this gives you an indication of the types of products that will have essentially a satisfactory pH range to essentially limit the growth of these bacteria. If businesses want to use pH as a control measure, they should consider getting a digital pH with test solutions and a neutral solution to calibrate their device. I've had a look at digital pH and quite frankly, they're quite inexpensive for what they are. They're not as expensive as what you might consider. So they could be quite effective, especially if they're using this as a necessary control measure. So the curing process can involve salt, sugar, alcohol, and acidic solutions such as the pH scale, which will limit bacterial growth. Fish products should be fully prepared with shell and skin removed to allow contact of curing marinades directly onto the fish. When applying this to raw seafood, it should only be done in a suitable time frame with consideration to the thickness of the fish product. Now, I've tried to look for the guidance for the correct thickness of the fish to how long you leave it to cure, but I've not found a definitive one that gives me an accurate representation. But essentially, if it is the thickness of a normal salmon fillet, so a whole side of salmon, that should be left in a liquid marinade for a minimum of 24 hours. But I will publish that on the Safe Food document once it is finished. Now, you also have smoking, which is involved in sushi and sashimi. Now, if the business has not done its pH process to essentially limit the bacteria, it has to be considered as a normal food product which needs to normal temperature controls. So cold smoking should be done under the same guidance as normal preparation methods, not exposing the seafood products to prolonged periods outside of the cold chain. Hot smoking should be done following the normal FSA guidance of a core temperature of 60 degrees Celsius for 45 minutes. So essentially, if they haven't got the pH control in place, they have to follow the normal guidance because there's no assurance that any other smoking range will be safe. Then goes on to service. Now, we're all aware of the 4-hour rule. And obviously, because it's raw fish, this is vitally important. Special attention will be needed to monitor the total shelf life of sushi product. So, for instance, if the preparation takes 1 hour and a further 40 minutes for the prepared food to reduce to safe temperatures and chill units, if this is the case, the food should then only be displayed for 2 hours and 20 minutes. Businesses should take this into consideration and have a system in place for total preparation time and maximum time food can be displayed. The way that I've worked with this on the last business is essentially say, what is the maximum time the business is going to take to prepare a dish? They said it's going to be an hour. So there we said, well, okay, once it's prepared, how thick are the containers? How long is it going to take for that food to then get back down to a safe temperature in the fridge? It was going to take 40 minutes. So therefore, if we put 2 hours as the maximum service time that food is allowed to be on display, then that food will be safe for that 2-hour period if it's not chilled on display. And then this can go on how you would manage conveyor belts within sushi businesses. So as a lot of sushi restaurants may use automated belts for their plated dishes, it can be difficult for food handlers and service staff to know which dishes are older. Labels or color coding plating system can be used to identify dishes which need to be removed first. So in this particular restaurant, they're using green, orange, red, and blue. And all they do is on each hourly segment, they change over the dish. And when it gets to that 2-hour segment, all the dishes that have been, for instance, blue first are removed from the conveyor belt as essentially an effective management system. And they do have all this recorded down as well of which one needs to be removed when. So obviously within sushi, you're going to have all your main fish elements, so fish, mollusks, and crustaceans. But within normal sushi practices, it's also a common place for soy. Soy sauce is a common condiment, nuts, and also peanuts. All staff should obviously receive suitable allergen awareness training. And ideally, they should be either taking a formal accredited course or at a very minimum using the FSA allergen training online. And finally, on the actual PowerPoint itself, the documentation needed for sushi, and it may not necessarily apply to all of these listed, but these are just some of the areas that you may want to include within a documentation. So obviously staff training records, the certificates and qualifications, especially the sushi qualification. You want delivery documents, which will obviously include the temperature, the type of food that's been supplied, and supporting documents such as the frozen statement for satisfactory time frame and the safe water statement. And then you will also want your chill and freezer unit records, cooking reheating records, inclusive of any smoking foods, and a pH records, which should be, all of these are specific for the sushi lifespan. Now, I have already supplied everyone on here with the further reading on the chat. If anybody hasn't received it, just pop me a message and I will send that over. So that is the nutshell of the PowerPoint. I want to open the floor if anybody's got specific questions or areas that they'd like further clarification on, as I wasn't sure of the different spectrums of people that might be attending this.
People like Robson Green, if you follow their programs, quite often they will eat raw sushi, raw fish, as they catch it.
Well, that's I
mean, they're not serving them, obviously.
No.
Which is not the best way to go about things. I'm just going to see. The other thing is I've got. Let me just let's have a look.
Well, the main thing, obviously, with the frozen is most fish, if it's for sushi grade, is frozen at sea. And I mean, most bacteria, that's not really going to be a main concern. Let's see, obviously, it's going to be the parasites more than anything. I know you've got some fantastic PDFs. I don't know if you can share them in the chat on the parasites that you did a couple of weeks ago.
Can you see that, Brendan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. This is from last, I think it was September. We did a full presentation lasting about an hour, 40 minutes plus questions. And included in the parasites were the freshwater fish and the fresh and marine fish flatworms. And I'm not even going to try and pronounce things, but there's a top one, which is Opista, whatever it is, and then there's a dippy one below. And basically, that is how fish worms get into our gut. Yeah? So it's usually through an intermediate host, usually small fish, and then the larvae develop in that and in crustacea. And eventually you eat the fish and it gets back into your gut when you eat the fish. And then you raw fish infections are basically chloronicasis, which is your eyes and skin get jaundice. You get enlargement of the liver and tenderness. You've got nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and loss of appetite. Then you've got anisacasis, sudden severe pains. And with the dippy one on the right-hand side, you've got central irritability. You've got tingling and numbness in your skin. You've got an increased heart rate. And you've got muscular weakness and then vague abdominal discomfort. So those are the types, the way it goes in, and the symptoms involved in all that.
Raised.
Sorry, I couldn't see everyone's hand.
That's okay. I was just going to ask, Brendan, if you were advising like a small business that's maybe producing a sort of small quantity of sushi, mm-hmm. What would be the things that you would advise them to have as like control points or critical control points? Because a lot of the things that you obviously you've gone through in terms of the safety points, the reputable suppliers, checking your paperwork when you're coming in to make sure it's had the freezing control, you would sort of expect to be almost covered by the prerequisites, wouldn't you? So I was just wondering what sort of controls or critical control points you'd expect in a business producing sushi.
Well, essentially the delivery stage is obviously the vital one. The only thing I've not included on the actual PowerPoint is farm salmon, mainly Scottish farm salmon, which has a very specific exemption that it doesn't need freezing. But then it depends on how they're actually going about preparing that food thereon, and what other factors. So, for instance, if they are also preparing raw meat and raw poultry on site, then there's obviously additional factors to sort of think about, because you've got those other factors which are necessarily not going to receive any heat treatment if they do come under cross-contamination with essentially the raw fish, because that's obviously the main thing that's the biggest concern, because it is raw fish and seafood. more than anything. So if they're going down the curing process, that's where they'd want to sort of go down that pH scale and at least have some sort of formulated evidence or due diligence there that they've got essentially satisfactory sort of, whether it's pH testings or I know you can get certain things from manufacturers that actually state on what the pH scale of certain products to sort of help their due diligence, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I know that some businesses, a colleague of mine visited one locally, and I know that they were acidifying the rice and testing the pH of the rice once they'd acidified it. So I can kind of comprehend that that's a control point that they can monitor. But I think this business in particular were just doing fish, so they weren't doing any curing or anything themselves. They were simply purchasing raw fish and, raw cold smoked salmon or something, and using that in the preparation of the sushi.
Was the cold smoked salmon produced outside or internally?
It was produced outside, so it came to them as cold smoked salmon.
Oh, well, if it's cold smoked salmon, obviously that would lie with the actual producer or the person that's produced that salmon. So other than their responsibility to make sure that that's obviously kept safe and served safely, etc., and that's all fine. In terms of the raw fish, as long as they're following that guidance of making sure that they have that documentation in place, they're making sure it's a reputable supplier and sourced from all safe waters, etc., then, just follow essentially normal things. As long as they're not going sort of too wide range and starting to have things like puffer fish that they're buying in that would obviously need quite an excelled level of knowledge.
Yeah, if they're doing it themselves, it's really the acidification of the rice then that's probably the thing that they control most in terms of the pH, and then just making sure obviously they're not keeping it out for too long once they've prepared it.
But the normal things like don't give it an extended shelf life. Obviously, rice you only want to be using within 24 hours anyway. But obviously, I've not put rice on there, but that just follows the normal guidance of don't reheat more than once, and ideally don't reheat at all.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, an interesting one. Also, if someone's doing sushi or sashimi, if you're using seaweed, you need to make sure that seaweed is safe for human consumption. So it'd be no good getting seaweed from, say, Brit Bay, because it's contaminated with sewage. So it needs to be the actual, all of the ingredients need to be safe. So if you're buying in smoked salmon that's already been prepared, you need to make sure that those people have prepared it properly. So you need to do, maybe, if you're a large operation and you're buying from a factory or from a supplier, you might need to want to go and see visually, have a physical inspection to make sure that they are achieving the same standards that you're hoping to work to. Yeah, because not all food producers. I remember we had a sandwich supplier in town who bought his fillings from a particular food factory down the road. Okay, it was about 10, 20 years ago, but they had a contamination of coronation chicken in the sandwiches, which led to, I think it was Salmonella Gold Coast outbreak. And for a while, the owner of the sandwich factory was having kittens because he thought he was going to be responsible. But we managed to prove that it was the supplier that had got him. So it's making sure that whoever supplies your business, that you've got adequate, suitable and sufficient product and supplier checks. That goes without saying.
Sorry, I couldn't see how to stick my hand up. Could you tell us a bit more about stock rotation and what you normally expect to see shelf life on these sorts of products, the rice and the sushi and sashimi?
Well, from the rice point of view, if it's dry rice, it's got more or less an indefinite shelf life. Go by what it says on the best before date. But once you've cooked it, personally, I will cook the rice off, chill it under cold water to rapidly cool it, and store it for not more than a couple of days.
Sorry, I was thinking more of the cured rice, with the with the pH control?
Personally, I would make sure that I wouldn't go over that 48-hour period, but that's a personal point of view.
Well,
You may, for example, put the pH control and it might last for 5 days a week or whatever.
Yeah.
But you need to be absolutely sure that you haven't, either via the fish or the other ingredients, haven't diluted that pH range. So from a practical point of view, I would want to make sure that I was cooking, preparing and serving within that 48-hour time period.
Yeah, because I've seen cured rice with a shelf life of up to 7 days, I think.
Well, yeah, I'm sure you can. I mean, that goes for anything like cooked chilled, you've got 5 day shelf life, for example. For things like sous vide, you've got anything up to a 10-day shelf life. Well, that's not something I would personally be happy with. And if you go over that sort of 48-hour period, you need to make sure that your documentation is in place, that it's valid, and that you're doing everything else by the book, and that you've got trained staff on. I mean, what happens, for example, if you've got a trained operator and they suddenly get taken ill or on holiday, and there's no one on the premises who knows what they're doing?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
You know, and they'll say, oh, well, yeah, the chef, he keeps that in the fridge for a week, so we'll just do this. And if you allow that thing to happen, you're always going to be at a greater risk of having problems.
Oh, it's something we find all the time.
Well, yeah.
You know, the trained person's away. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Well, yeah, precisely. So the point is to minimise the risk to the lowest common denominator. That's the way I would do it if I was running that sort of a business.
Sure.
Yeah? Because if it's a shared Stefan, pardon my French, then it's going to be the whole business, including the owners, that are going to be put to task, and you've got to then work backwards and prove that what you've done is correct.
I will say something, but please, for God's sake, just take it with a grain of salt. On one of the guidance documents, I can't remember exactly which one, but it does say that if you achieve below that 4.5, which is Bacillus cereus, rice is ambient stable. So I don't know how long the shelf life would be. I don't know how many of us would actually be comfortable in storing cooked rice as ambient stable. But that is in there somewhere. So in terms of a chilled rice product below, but then let's not forget that, what is it, salmonella, that's got a pH tolerance of down to 3.8. So like the cross contamination is probably like the biggest factor. So I think if it's just a sushi restaurant, there's not as much concern than a restaurant that's doing sushi and other products, especially if they're cross using their containers and don't have a specific container for sushi, and they've got one for sushi that they're then potentially using for raw meat, and all it takes is the pot wash to wash that container properly, and then suddenly it's in a product that's potentially going to have a satisfactory pH level for I've lost my bearings now, Listeria and Bacillus cereus, but it wouldn't be satisfactory for salmonella.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago that I was teaching a vegetarian restaurant in Harrogate, and they all turned around and said, oh, well, we don't serve chicken, we don't serve beef or any meat or whatever. So we're relatively low risk. And so I said, well, what about your pasta? What about your rice? What about your sauces that you use? You know, all the rest of it. And they suddenly went away. I mean, even things like cottage cheese, for example, which is not suitable for a vegan restaurant, but for a vegetarian restaurant, it would be. I remember asking someone at the hospital kitchen when I used to be in the health service, I said, how would you check that cottage cheese is right? You transferred it into another bowl. And one of the chefs turned around to me and says, oh, I smell it. Well, what's that tell you? You know, okay, that was a few years ago, but you've got to make your systems safest so that it's not just the commie chef or whoever, or the catering assistant or whatever that's in charge of that. It needs adequate supervision and control to be effective. And if I must admit, from my own point of view, I've been involved in teaching food safety since 1990, which is a hell of a long time. It's 38 33 years this year. And if anything, the standards in the industry have gone down, particularly with Brexit and COVID and all the closures and all the rest of it, and the inspections not being there, and the environmental health have not had the resources to go out and inspect people. It beggars belief what the situation now is. I'm glad I'm retired, so I wouldn't like to be out there being responsible for what people do these days.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Brendan and co. Just my experience a little bit, and be interested to see what you say is, sometimes they get asked, or I get asked, what colour chopping board do you think I should use?
Well, if I say, you can get up to, if you include a purple board, which is used for allergens, you can have up to about 8 colour codes in the kitchen. When I used to work for the health service, and my advice from the trainer is, your colour codes can be whatever they want. They don't even have to be colour coded, as long as you can identify what board, what knives they use for any particular substance. But I always used to say, right, for raw meat, it's red. For raw fish, it's blue. For raw vegetables, it's green. And for cooked and ready-to-eat and prepared foods, it's yellow. And those 4 keep it simple. But what you've got to remember is, if you're preparing a ham salad, you don't just have the green for salad. You wash the salad and do it all on the yellow board. And similarly, you don't use a raw fish for cooked prawns, because they are a cooked product. So if you're making a prawn cocktail, you can all be prepared with washed salad items on the cooked food board. The one thing I would say on colour coding and prevention of cross-contamination, how many of you actually see colour-coded cloths these days out in the workplace? Does anyone see colour-coded cloths? Well, we used to have them all about the place. I used to train with colour-coded cloths up until about 10, 15 years ago, and I suddenly realised the amount of potential for cross-contamination is. So what I always advise staff to do is, if you're going to use cloths to wipe a food surface, always use your food-grade paper roll, that you pull down. And that's the only safe way to do it. And single-use disposable cloth, get rid of it.
And I think it's one thing important to go back to John's comment is, and I had this last week when I was helping a business, because they've essentially got a 500-page HACCP document that's the best HACCP document in the world. But when the environmental health team have been in the kitchen and said, where's your raw meat section, and 7 different kitchen staff are saying 7 different areas of the kitchen, then obviously that doesn't build the best confidence in the world. And she put, because they were sort of trying to ask her which chopping board should they use for all their different products, and she said, it doesn't really matter, because you've got a fantastic dishwasher that washes and disinfects. The chopping board is just there as an identification that you're preparing this kind of ingredient, so therefore it's not safe to use any other ingredient on this chopping board at this time. And that's the main thing. So use whatever colour chopping board you want. Just make sure you've got a good segregation in place, and then a good cleaning and disinfection process.
I mean, one of the biggest drawbacks about colour-coded chopping boards is that if you've got a butcher's block with wood on it, and it's only used for raw meat, and it's like you've probably seen them where they're bow-shaped when they're finished. And the problem with that is, when you put a cleaver or a knife on a wooden board, the split stays open. So if you're using salt and a steel brush to wash it, you get rid of all that when you're finished. Whereas with a plastic board, you put a knife or a cleaver on the board, it goes like that, and then it closes up again. And that is actually more dangerous. So if you're using plastic boards, the main tip is to make sure not that you just send them through a dishwash, but that you actually have the boards in good condition. And boards aren't cheap. If you were talking about 20, 25 quid 15, 20 years ago for a chopping board, probably a lot more now. So they're very, very expensive. And with businesses trying to save money now, there is a danger that people will be using totally inadequate equipment.
Right, we're about 5 minutes out. Has anybody got any urgent questions before we log off?
David?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. The only issue with TASAP is whenever I raise it as a subject matter to a lot of the FBOs that we're currently seeing, I think it's something which they consider does not apply to the SMEs that a lot of the businesses we inspect.
Oh, no. What I would suggest is go onto the Food Standards Agency website and get the latest copy of Safer Food, Better Business. Then at the back end of the copy, I would have anything that you might want to put in. For example, if I had a restaurant and you were coming out and seeing my restaurant, there would be a copy of the front page of the latest guidance, which came out back in November, I think, from the British Hospitality. So there'll be the front page taken from that. There'll be a copy of the current temperature regulations, any particular variances on your cleaning schedule, and all the rest of the things. Like there might be for example, I've done a few fact sheets which covers the like of the Listeria, E. coli 157, and various other things. I'd also be asking them, or I would have on display in my kitchen office, a hand washing kit for training hand washing, for example. Because people don't regularly train or check that the staff are washing hands properly or effectively.
Yeah, what I try to, the way I try to broach the subject is that of disgruntled employees, in particular, in relation to those which are purposefully adulterating products with the intention of malicious claims or malicious activity, either because of falling out with the business owner or such like that they wish to themselves or their colleagues or their friends generate an income stream. So I think a lot of people say it's not really applicable to SMEs because of the fact that they don't have instances like that. But I do wonder. I think during these times of where financial constraints on individuals, they will look at the potential benefit of, well, if I do this, I could potentially get this. And I always just advise FBOs to be aware of that fact. But I was just wondering if there's anything available when you obviously do your TASAP or your VASAP presentation, just to give us some examples of instances that have occurred.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I did a couple of years ago, I produced 2 sides of A4 on dealing with food complaints. So it's based with the food business owner. And basically it's, when someone rings up and says, you made me ill, I ate this and he made me ill. The first thing I would do was say, well, I'm terribly sorry to hear you're ill, but what I want you to do is go and see your own doctor. I will then inform the Environmental Health Department that I've had a food complaint. They will probably come around and need to do a stool sample with you and take all details. And in the meantime, can you fill me this diary out for what you've eaten over the last 7 days? And when you present that information to them, it will weed out the wheat from the chaff. So you'll only end up, as a food business owner, with people who've got a genuine concern, right? The ones that have been trying to get a free meal or just, trying to do a fraud type of thing, it'll scare the shit out of them, pardon my French. I had this in a hotel in Bradford, and it was a colleague of mine who, she had this, she rang me up one day, she said, Steve, what do I do? She said, I've had someone come in, and they came in the Friday night, they had smoked salmon and a beef steak, and they'd been up all night with diarrhea. So I thought, well, there was only one, I can't remember what it was, there was only one thing that would give you diarrhea, and it was nothing that would be associated with those particular foods. So I told her what to do. I gave her the paperwork. She went to Bradford City Council, and they were very, very pleased with her because that was the first time they'd ever had a food business owner say they had a food complaint. And they agreed with me that their outbreak of diarrhea was nothing to do with the food that they said they'd eaten. And it was obviously something they'd had, it wasn't disputing the fact they'd had food poisoning, but it was something they'd had before they came to the hotel. And that just gave peace of mind to the food business owner. And also, it actually raised their standards with the local environmental health, because they'd actually got in a procedure that the HOs were really happy with. So, I haven't used the copies myself for a while. If anyone wants a copy of that, I'm quite happy to let you have a copy of that if you email me.
Thank you.
On that nutshell, we'll leave it there because we are 8:05. Well, I've just posted in the presentation and the safer food sushi provisional document, just in case anybody didn't get it because they came in after I'd sent it the first time. Please, by all means, you're welcome to download it, share it, edit it, do as you wish. But yeah, I will think that'll be about it until next month.